Imagine a Britain where no town or village was too far, a country where the sound of a train whistle wasn't just familiar, it was a lifeline. For over a century, the railways connected everything, carrying people, goods and ideas. They didn't just keep Britain moving, they held it together. And then, they stopped. By the 1960s, the unthinkable happened. Thousands of miles of track were ripped up. Stations that had served communities for generations were boarded shut. Villages were cut off, and entire regions were left behind. A system that had defined Britain for over a century simply disappeared. How could a nation that built its identity on the railway turn its back on it so completely? This is the story of a decision that reshaped Britain forever. A story of ambition, betrayal, and loss. This is the story of the day Britain's railways disappeared. For over 100 years, the railways were Britain's backbone. They carried coal from the mines, goods to markets, and workers to factories. They made seaside holidays possible for families, linked cities to villages, and turned rural towns into thriving hubs. For many communities, the train wasn't just a convenience, it was their only connection to the outside world. The railways powered the Industrial Revolution and helped Britain become a global leader. They delivered the resources that fueled factories, the workers who kept them running, and the products that drove the economy. But the railways didn't just carry goods and passengers, they carried progress. They were symbols of a nation on the move. But by the mid-20th century, the world was changing. Cars became more affordable, giving people a freedom trains couldn't match. Lorries took over freight transport, delivering goods directly to warehouses and businesses without the need for railway stations. New motorways promised speed and convenience that made the railways feel for the first time like relics of a bygone era. Passenger numbers fell, while operating costs soared. The sprawling network that had once been the pride of Britain now seemed inefficient and outdated. By the early 1960s, the government was faced with a choice: adapt the railways for a new era or cut back dramatically to save what remained. The man tasked with finding a solution was Dr. Richard Beeching, a physicist by training. He wasn't a railwayman. He was brought in to analyse the numbers and fix the system. And the numbers weren't promising. In 1963, Beeching released his report, The Reshaping of British Railways. It was a blueprint for drastic cuts. Over 5,000 miles of track and more than 2,300 stations would be closed. Entire regions, particularly rural areas, would lose their rail connections. It was a move that would forever alter the map of Britain. Beeching's focus was clear: efficiency. His philosophy was simple: if a line wasn't making money, it had no future. To him, it was a matter of survival, keeping the profitable parts of the network alive by cutting away what he saw as excess. But for the communities affected, it wasn't just about numbers. These lines carried more than passengers or goods. They carried lives. They took children to school, workers to factories, and goods to market. For many villages and small towns, the railway wasn't just important, it was essential. Losing it wasn't an inconvenience, it was devastating. The backlash was immediate. Across the country, protests broke out. Residents rallied to save their local lines, writing letters, signing petitions, and gathering at stations in the hope of reversing the closures. But the government pressed ahead. For most, the fight was already lost. The closures came quickly. One by one, stations shut their doors. Tracks were ripped up. Trains made their final journeys on routes that had been part of life for generations. For rural areas, the impact was severe. Villages that had depended on the railway for everything, from goods to visitors, were suddenly isolated. Businesses that relied on trains to move products or bring in customers began to struggle. Some shut down entirely. For people without cars, life became smaller. Trips that had once been simple now felt impossible. By the end of the decade, the railway network had been transformed. What remained focused on intercity and commuter routes, lines that served larger populations and turned a profit. Over 5,000 miles of track were gone, and entire regions were left behind. The tracks weren't mothballed or left for potential revival, they were destroyed. Stations were demolished, tracks were ripped out, land was sold off or repurposed. For most of these routes, there was no going back. The effects of these closures rippled through the country. Villages that had once been thriving hubs became ghost towns. Young people moved to cities, leaving aging populations behind. Shops and markets that relied on railway traffic saw fewer customers and eventually closed. And with the rise of car dependency, traffic congestion and pollution became everyday problems. It wasn't just a practical loss, it was an emotional one. The railways were a part of Britain's identity, symbols of progress and connection. Their disappearance left scars on communities that had relied on them and shaped how the country moved forward. Today, the traces of what was lost remain. Abandoned tracks, overgrown platforms, and rusting bridges dot the countryside. These ghost lines stand as silent reminders of what once was, a time when the railway reached into every corner of the nation. Some lines have been resurrected. Heritage railways, preserved and run by volunteers, keep parts of the old network alive. Steam engines still whistle through the countryside, offering a glimpse of what the railways once meant. And a few closed lines, like the Borders Railway in Scotland, have been rebuilt to reconnect isolated communities. But projects like these are rare. The reality is, for most of the lines that were lost, they're gone forever. The railways that remain today are smaller but still vital. They connect major cities, carry millions of commuters, and play an increasingly important role in reducing carbon emissions. Yet, the scars of Beeching's cuts are still visible. Many rural communities remain isolated, and the choices made then continue to shape the way Britain travels today. The day Britain's railways disappeared wasn't just an ending, it was a turning point. For some, Beeching's cuts were a necessary evil, a last-ditch effort to save a failing system from total collapse. The railways were losing millions, and the government argued that drastic action was the only way to keep the network alive, even if it meant focusing only on the most profitable routes. But for others, those cuts came at a cost that was far too high. By prioritising efficiency over connection, the system was left permanently broken, with rural communities abandoned and entire regions cut off. What had once been a symbol of progress and unity became something smaller, more fragmented, a service for commuters and cities, not the country as a whole. Critics argue that the government traded long-term vision for short-term savings, and the scars of that decision are still visible today. The loss wasn't just about tracks or stations, it was about what they represented. The railways carried opportunity, connection, and a sense of belonging. When they disappeared, so did a way of life. As we face today's challenges, climate change, overcrowded roads, and growing divisions between urban and rural areas, the railways that remain are more vital than ever. They stand as a reminder of something fundamental. Connection matters. It's not just about moving people or goods, it's about creating links between communities, opportunities and lives. It's about what we share and how we move forward together. The tracks that disappeared may never return, but their story is far from over. They challenge us to reflect on the decisions we make, what we choose to preserve, what we let go, and the costs of progress. They remind us that connection is more than convenience. It's the thread that holds a nation together. The question isn't just about what was lost, it's about what we'll choose to protect in the future. When it comes to connection, what's worth saving, and what will we leave behind?